Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Hello and welcome to the show. We are looking forward today to talking with you as we always do. This is a call-in show, so you can ask whatever questions you like, and we'll do our best at helping you with a hopefully good answer. Our phone number is 845-5689, 845-5689, or you can reach us by email at gardensuccess@tamu.edu. gardensuccess@tamu.edu. The nice thing about the email route is that we can sometimes have a picture attached that may help with a diagnosis or identification of a plant or situation that you're curious about. We finally turned the corner and entered our new year, and that means that our big spring fever is just around the corner. We don't get cooped up all winter like maybe folks would further north, but still we do have our winter season where when spring comes we are busting at the gates ready to go. And the one thing that I like to remind gardeners of is spring fever. We're going to treat it like it is a disease of the gardener's brain. It's like a virus-like thing that affects the centers of our brain that help manage reason, and they sometimes throttle optimism, or at least mix optimism with facts on some good ideas. I joke about that, but seriously, when it's spring and the flowers and vegetables and things are being put out, and the weather is such that you think, my goodness, I need to get out there and plant something or tend to something, we can kind of get real enthusiastic. I think the best gardens I ever have are those in my mind's eye before the season begins. You look at seed catalogs and you see all these beautiful, bountiful vegetables and flowers and whatnot, and you can just dream of your place, your little corner of Eden, in its full glory. And we hope you can achieve that, and there's ways to achieve it. I'm not certainly not making fun of the idea or the hope of such a thing, but in order for you to realize the hope and the dreams that you have, we need to apply a little bit of facts to that. And the reason I say that is every year, by the time we get into the season, different times with different plants, but usually by summer, I talk to people or I see pictures from people that are showing me a problem in their garden. And it may be a problem where the plants were planted too close, and now they're overcrowded and there's disease issues going on. Whereas with a little bit of facts at the planting time, when they brought all these wonderful plants home from the garden center, they would have known the better spacing to put them at. Or maybe it's a variety of vegetable, let's say, that just takes forever to reach harvest date. Brandywine tomatoes, an example of that. Depending on the strain of brandywine, some of those are like 80 days to harvest. We need tomatoes that are about 70 days to harvest, ideally. A little over that is okay, but the further you push the harvest when you get your first fruits in, the sooner the heat of summer, which stops fruit set, arrives, and you end up with a little productive window. So with your brandywines, you'll get some fruit, but you won't get as much fruit as you would if you chose a better adapted variety that is faster from planting to harvest. Get the idea? So there are a lot of different ways things can go south. I enjoy going to garden centers in the spring and just watching the people because there's so much enthusiasm and so much interest, and you just I love seeing that, and I think it's great. But I've often suggested that maybe we need to contact our legislators and ask for a law that requires a 3-day waiting period before you're allowed to purchase plants. I hear every garden center screaming, no! Here's the idea. You go up to the to the counter to purchase your plants, and you've got this flat of flowers or vegetables or a mix of both, and the person behind the counter says, "Okay, have you prepared your soil yet for this? Are you sure the drainage is right and everything? Have you checked your soil nutrient levels and gotten that leveled out for everything?" And if you say no, they just say, "Well, I'm going to take this flat and I'm going to set it down here, and if you'll come back in 3 days, having done that, you can have your plants." Well, obviously that's silly, but it makes a point, and that is that to take home plants and plop them down in unprepared soil is just a recipe for disappointment and discouragement. And we don't want people to be disappointed and discouraged. I want you to be inspired by gardening. I want you to love gardening and just find it so successful. I have an article coming out tomorrow that talks about some of the things that new gardeners need to be aware of and need to do in order to have success. Maybe you have never gardened and you're finally getting around to trying it out. Great. Welcome to the world of gardening. We're glad to have you. Maybe you have thought about, or maybe you've tried gardening and it just seemed to be a failure. And you just say, "Well, I've got a brown thumb and I can't grow like Grandma did," and you give up on gardening. Well, brown thumbs are not permanent. Brown thumbs are uninformed thumbs. They are inexperienced thumbs. And you can turn a brown thumb green just by learning. And as you start that process of learning, you do it when you listen to the radio show. You're learning about things about growing. You hear other people's questions and their questions that you have. Or maybe reading a local gardening articles or local, that is Texas local magazines like Texas Gardener, and you get local information that you can apply in your garden. And the better you get at that, the more success you have. And just realize that gardening is an interaction with nature. It is. Even if we create some unnatural thing like a topiary shrub, or, actually every garden is unnatural in the sense that you tell all the vegetables to grow in rows right here and then to stop right there, and that's where the lawn gets to begin growing, and you don't want it growing. That's not how nature plants, and that's how nature grows, but that's okay. We create a garden just like painting a picture that suits us. And as you begin to learn how to do that, and you begin to try your hand at doing that, it just gets better. But I can tell you this, I've been gardening a long time, and if you knew how many plants I've killed over the years, you'd stop listening to this show. A horticulturist, I can't remember who it was, so I won't throw a name out there in a guess, but some well-known national horticulturist I made the statement that you can't become a good horticulturist until you kill a lot of plants. Well, that's true of gardening. Just realize that gardening is not something where, if you fail, it's just horrible and it's all over and you're no good and you can't grow things. It is something that everybody can do. And everybody can do it differently to suit their interests and to suit their finances, to suit the space that they have in their yard. And you get to do that. And just realize that it's okay to fail. It's okay for things not to do well. Every year, you're going to have, let's say tomatoes, for example. One year they're bountiful and everything's happy. The next year, for some reason, they're just not. And, we could drill down and find perhaps the causes of it. Sometimes we don't fully understand it. But that's just part of the vicissitudes of nature, as they put it. It's just part of that ebb and flow. But it's not a failure. It's you grow a lot of things and you enjoy, and the enjoyment is in the process, and you are going to have a lot of successes. But don't let one discouragement stop you from it. Maybe it's a matter of figuring out how to do that, learning how to do that, getting a little more experience. You can call the County AgriLife Extension Office in whatever county you live in and talk to your agent about questions that you might have. You can find experienced gardeners who've gardened for years, and they can tell you, this variety of squash or tomato or pepper or whatever, is just outstanding, or this species of flower just holds up through the summer really well, I'd suggest you go with it in the spring. And each time you do that, you become a better gardener. Well, I'm doing a monologue, and we need to not have that. So I'm going to give you the phone number. It's 979-845-5689, 845-5689, or by email, gardensuccess@tamu.edu, gardensuccess@tamu.edu. I do get kind of philosophical, I guess, about gardening. It seems, especially this time of year, but I just think it's probably the best hobby in the world that you can have. Of course, I'm biased, but it allows you to experience life, to interact with nature, which I believe is just part of the ideal human condition when we're interacting with the world, the natural world, the environment around us. Gardening provides a little exercise. Gardening provides a lot of mental stimulation and mental encouragement. I've seen so many research studies where something like they look at depression, or they look at issues with memory and other things, and they find that when you put gardening into the mix, it changes things for the better. And so I just think that it is a great thing. We gardening keeps us humble for sure, because you when you fail, you realize you don't know everything. But I think of Thomas Jefferson. I think he said one time, "Though I am an old man, but I am still a young gardener," or something along those lines. And I think that's putting it very, very well. Well, let's talk about some things going on around town, some of the things you might be interested in. By the way, pretty soon a lot of stuff is going to be cranking up as we get later in January and February. Lots of activity. Spring is a busy time for learning a lot of things. But on today, January 5th, this evening at 6:30 p.m. out in Lick Creek Park in the Gary Halter Nature Center. For those of you new to the area, Lick Creek is out East Rock Prairie Road. There's going to be a program by the Post Oak chapter of the Native Plant Society called Conservation Priorities in College Station, and it's presented by Lori Brown. Lori is a new recreation supervisor for the Lick Creek Park Nature Center and the Southwood Recreation Center, and she's going to be talking about some of the conservation priorities that we have in the city. There's a very significant interest in doing planning that leads us toward a future that is just that, let's say, we benefit over the decades ahead because someone stopped and planned and thought and created these natural areas where everyone can enjoy. Lick Creek's one of those right now, by the way. To go out there and walk the trails through nature it's just really, really nice. And you feel like you've been transported to another place, but it's right here in town. And there are many other areas like that. So that's tonight, 6:30 p.m. There's no charge for that. On Saturday, this Saturday, January 7th, the Rio Brazos Audubon Society is having one of their birding walks. They call him Birding 101 Bird Walk. And this will be at 8:30 in the morning this Saturday, again at the Gary Halter Nature Center in Lick Creek Park. And it's a chance for people that are new to birding to sharpen their birding skills and even to learn the basics of identifying birds by sight and sound. So there'll be a short talk on field guides and binoculars and whatnot. And by the way, they'll have some loaner binoculars if you don't own some. Make sure and bring some water because you're going to head out and have hands-on experience, eyes-on experience, seeing and identifying the birds that are common here in our area. So I hope you enjoy that. Next Tuesday, January the 10th, the Brazos County Rose Society is meeting. They meet at noon. Now, if you want more information, I don't have a location they provided, but you can call Maggie, and here's the number. It's 979 area code 778-4252, and they can give you more information about the Rose Society and the meeting that's coming up next Tuesday at noon. I hope you'll take advantage of some of those opportunities. In my garden, I've been working with vegetables a lot this winter, and I really went all out last year with some plant breeding and things we were doing. But I've got some broccoli that's in. I've got a little broccoli trial going on, looking at some different varieties. But now is the time when we start planting those kinds of things again. All those blue leaf vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, collards, kale. What am I forgetting? There's probably did I say cabbage? Yeah. Those all go in ideally starting about mid-January, and that we can continue planting them on into February through at least 3/4 of February, ideally. Of course, there's room on each end for not so ideal, but still okay. But you want to get those in because the heat of summer is coming, even though it doesn't seem like it now. It will. May is a hot month here. And so you want to get those things in so they have time to develop. If you're planting seeds of lettuce or spinach or transplants, you can plant those at this time as well. Lettuce is kind of the poster green, but for the cool season. But other things like arugula or rocket or rocket is another green that we can plant this time. Corn salad, also called mosh, is a little green we can plant. And then sorrel. Sorrel is kind of a lemony green that does really well here. I had some really nice sorrel in the garden last year that lasted well into the heat. I was really surprised at how far that went into the heat. But it's a good time to do that. If you're going to plant onions to have onion bulbs, you want to get those transplants out sometime this month or certainly by early February. And here's why. The onions need to get in the ground and start growing fast. They need water and they need fertilizer to do that because your goal is to grow the biggest onion plant as fast as you can. And here's the reason why. Onions that we eat, the rings of the onion, the bulb of the onion, each ring is connected to a leaf. It's essentially the base of a leaf. So if you've got a scrawny little onion plant by the time you want to harvest and it has 3 leaves on it, how big of a bulb can that be, right? So the bigger and more robust your plant, the bigger and better your onion bulb will be. Now, a scrawny onion bulb tastes just as good as a big one. I mean, you just don't get as much harvest. So if you're going to plant red onions or yellow or white or whatever you want to plant, the garden centers that are around town will sell you little bundles of onion plants, and you want to plant them about as deep as the first joint on your index finger. Isn't that cool that we have a built-in measuring device right there at the end of our index finger? That's about how deep you plant them. And again, when you get them in the ground, get them in ground that is enriched with compost and maybe even a little extra fertilizer if the nutrients are low. And then keep them moist, mulch well to keep all the weeds out of them because, again, what are we trying to do? Grow as big a plant as fast as we can. That's kind of the secret in this area to growing onions. Late this month, we got a little window, let's say the last week of February or January, first couple of weeks of February, where we would put in our cool season peas. And so that would be like a sugar snap type pea. It would be the kinds of peas that you shell out, like we call them English peas. And it would also be snow peas, a flat potted, a little BB size seeds in them. All of those cool season peas, they do well in the cool season. They don't do well in hard freezes. The plants are hardier than the blooms and peas. So if we get them in now, we can get that harvest before it gets hot. And you want to pick varieties that are definitely under 65 days and preferably under 60 days so that they move really, really quickly and you're able to get the harvest that you want. Well, let's pause a moment. Again, our phone number, 845-5689, or by email at gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And we're going to go to the phones and talk to Roger. Hello, Roger.
Hello there, and Happy New Year to you.
And you as well.
I've got a couple of verbena bushes, and I've got my favorite kind of flower, which is the Mexican Mexican violet, I guess it is.
Okay.
And my question is that I'm sort of afraid to cut them down to the ground now. I do that every year, but I don't want to do it and have them start growing again, and then have a freeze come. So
Right.
when should I cut them back?
Well, cutting them back, I'm assuming the top part is freeze damaged already.
Yes, it
Yeah.
all looks terrible.
So cutting them back is not going to stimulate growth. Temperature will stimulate growth. So when you're ready, go ahead and cut them back. And now, if if you had an evergreen shrub and you trimmed it, and had a few mild days, we would expect it to start pushing a little earlier than normal, maybe, but not for these perennials. They go to the ground.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
if you've got Mexican petunia, is it about 3 feet tall, or how big do the plants get?
They're about 2 feet, something like that tall.
Okay, yeah, those things. Be careful. They are enthusiastic reseeders. I had some once in a flower bed, and there was a sidewalk in front of it. And about, I don't know, 25 feet down the sidewalk, they started popping up because they threw their seeds on the sidewalk and rain washed them 25 feet down and planted some new ones for me. Just a word to the wise there.
Yeah, no, I've got them in several places in my yard, and I kind of enjoy them, really.
They're a wonderful plant. They're also a good pollinator. Bumblebees find their way into there and have a big time. But they're tough. But just be careful. I've had people get on me before for recommending them because they tend to be kind of invasive.
Yeah, I think so. I kind of appreciate that in my yard, anyhow.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and maybe get out this afternoon and start cutting them down.
All right, that sounds good.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roger. Again, the number here is 845-5689 if you'd like to give us a call. I want to go to talk about an email, a couple of emails that I received. I had an email from Glenn, and I am not a physicist, and I waded into physics when I talked about freezing, talking about how water, when it freezes, it changes state from liquid to a solid. I think I said it releases a calorie per cubic centimeter or something. And Glenn provided me some really interesting information. In fact, Glenn, we need to have a conversation. I want to know more about that. My numbers were off. I think a calorie can change water can change by a calorie per cubic centimeter just for each move in the thermometer, but it's a very different kind of physics. But the point is still the case, and he affirmed that when water freezes, it has to change state, and that causes a protection on the plant for reasons that I won't try to go into because they're too complex for my brain. But when water thaws and changes from solid to liquid, the opposite happens. Changing state from water from solid to liquid or liquid to gas, that there is an energy gain or loss that happens in that point. And you may have noticed, put water on the stove and heat it up to boiling, and it gets right up there around 212 Fahrenheit. And it's kind of it's like you have to push it to get it over that line. There's extra energy required to make that state change in water, if I'm using the right term there. But Glenn, I appreciate that email very much. Doing a radio show in a university town, pretty much any topic I talk about, I'm probably a novice and there's some expert listening at the same time. So, but I take credit, I take correction, or I take clarification. Either way, very well. And Glenn was gracious in his email on that. Let's see. I was talking about vegetables, and I want to just kind of finish that just a little bit. Now is also the time when, if you're going to plant an asparagus crowns, January is a good time to get that done. If you're going to plant artichokes from crowns, and those are sometimes a little hard to find locally, but artichokes from crowns or transplants can also be planted. It's better early on. Protect them against a really bad freeze like that 17 we had. That wouldn't be good for them. But get them in soon so that then they can develop a good sizable plant and begin to grow. It's also a time now to start our transplants indoors. If you want to grow tomatoes, and maybe you want to grow a variety you can't find locally, Well, you can buy seeds of that variety and you can start your own. And by starting your transplants in January for tomatoes, and by late January even for peppers, it takes about 6 weeks to grow a decent transplant. I start mine early and I just keep bumping them up. Sometimes I've got 1 gallon tomato plants by the time the coast is clear and I want to plant them in early to mid-March. And so starting, just count back about 6 weeks for tomatoes and peppers. Some things move fast. So if you're going to grow squash transplants, which normally we just direct seed squash, but all the melon family, the squash, the cantaloupes, the watermelons, the honeydew, the both summer and winter squash, by the way, and cucumbers, those cucurbit type plants can be grown as a transplant. You just don't want to leave them in the transplant cells so long that they kind of get a big mass of roots. They're not as happy about being transplanted after that. But that only takes you a couple of weeks to grow one, and so you would wait until later. Our average last frost date here is, or freeze date, is February 26th. And it's been interesting. I've done online research on this. We're fortunate to have the Oceanography and Meteorology Department here on campus, and the Office of the State Climatologist is here on campus, and a lot of good data out there. And one thing I've noticed is that last freeze date is moving earlier and earlier in the year. If you go back to data from 20 years ago, a decade of data or two from back then versus data from 10 years later or data now, it seems that our safe date to move out when it's the last average frost date is moving earlier. But right now it's February 26th. Now, average frost date, what does that mean? If you look at when the last freeze is each year, it's all over the place. So the average is kind of the middle of that, right? And so when you go with the average, you got about a 50-50 chance of it freezing again. I believe, if I'm correct on that. I'll probably get a meteorological education in soon here as well. But anyway, it doesn't mean that that's when you're not going to have freeze anymore. And I learned that, by the way, one year I wrote something for, let's say I was talking to somebody and I said in my article that the last average freeze date, this was in another city, was such and such. And the newspaper came out and it said, the county horticulturist says our last freeze this year will be on such and such date. Well, it was about 2 weeks before that date. And I spent those 2 weeks trying to convince everybody I could find that I did not say that. That's the last average. I don't know when the last one will be. Well, come along to that date, we had a freeze, and then we had no more freezes. So if I'd have kept my mouth shut, I would have seemed like a clairvoyant with a crystal ball. But anyway, average, just be aware of that with average. But we try to get our gardens in early. We were willing to cover our plants for a late frost or something like that, just to get a good early start, because summer's coming, and by the time temperatures are up in the 90s, nighttime temperatures in the upper 70s, our tomatoes, the large fruited tomatoes, stop setting fruit well. And so anything you can get set before that happens, which that's going to happen in probably May here, then now you'll still have tomatoes in June, but there were tomatoes that set a little bit earlier on, for example. But anyway, whenever that happens, it's over. You just kind of finish harvesting that plant. Now, small fruited tomatoes can keep going. The grape type and cherry type, they do pretty good in the heat, but not ideal. But anyway, so we want to get these things planted at the right time, so don't delay on your planting. I'm growing a number of pepper and tomato transplants this year. In fact, I'm planting them this week. You can buy a tray at the store and start your own seeds. I would recommend putting a couple of seeds in each cell. That way, if one doesn't come up, you're okay. The way I start mine is in a small container, like one of those plastic containers with a clear lid, like you might get as a take-home container in some restaurants, or maybe a condiment comes in, like ketchup or something like that comes in. in other restaurants. But if you've got a little clear lid, you put the potting soil in there and just moisten it, plant your seeds, and I may put, 20 tomato seeds in there. And once they're up and growing, just up and sprouting and doing good, you can lift them out and very gently tease them apart and put those into however many containers you want. Like if you have a big 72 cell tray, or if you just have some 4-inch pots and you only want 3 tomatoes, well, you could plant a few. And that way you use very little space until it's time to move them to the next area. To plant a big flat and have a crop failure, well, that's a large area. So anyway, that's just an idea that you might want to try as well. You want them under good light. Probably the most common issue with our transplants is not enough light. Now, when you overwater, when you get root rot diseases, when you have contaminated growing media, disease contaminated, and then you create that perfect disease environment, which is also the perfect seed starting environment of warmth and moisture, you end up with problems. Those are issues. But number one is light. And the reason is plants are very particular about the amount and the type of light that they get. And I've talked about it more than once on here about if you're going to grow transplants, buy a decent quality light to grow them in. The T5 high output fluorescents do pretty good on this if you get the right wavelengths, plant wavelengths. And there's some LEDs that do very well on this as well. But that way you can get exactly the amount of light you want by moving the light closer or further from the plant or the seedlings as they grow. And they're stocky and do well. One final tip on the growth of seedlings is you want to brush over them each day. Some plants, I mentioned cucurbits like a cucumber or a squash, they're already stocky. And if they've got good light, they're going to do well. But your little tomato and pepper transplants, if you just kind of rub over them both ways, just kind of brush them this way and brush them that way a couple times a day, it stimulates the plant to grow stockier. It's called, thigmotropism, something like that. I'm probably missing that word, but that movement, it's like a simulated wind. And as the plant gets bent, there's things that happen in the plant that says, hey, let's make a stronger stem here because we're getting pushed back and forth. And so when you grow a transplant in perfectly still air, if the light isn't perfect or really good and it's perfectly still, we often end up with somewhat spindly transplants. That's especially true without good light when you put them by a window and they're not getting enough light. But that thigmotropism, just to move them with your hand, brush them over a couple times a day, will make a difference in the stockiness of your little seedlings. Just another tip, hopefully, that will be helpful for you. Our phone number is 979-845-5689, 845-5689, or by email, gardensuccess@tamu.edu, gardensuccess@tamu.edu. I was talking earlier about things going on in the community. I do want to recommend a couple of other things that go on each week. One of them is the Aggie Horticulture's Facebook Live. If you go to the Aggie Horticulture's Facebook page, and there's a Facebook Live that goes on Wednesdays and on Fridays. Very short talks on gardening topics. Occasionally I'll do some. The specialists at A&M do a lot of them. And you can learn about things that are timely all over the place. Vegetables and fruit and lawns and, you name it. Grape growing and other things. But those are available on Aggie Horticulture Facebook Live. And then you can go watch the past ones. So we've been doing this for a long time now, pretty long time now. And you can go back and there's a whole lot of videos that you can go back and watch. And I think that's great. One of the nice things about technology and gardening is that you create an educational product, you put it out there on the web, and people can watch it in their pajamas at 2 in the morning 3 years from now when it was live a long time ago. So that's just a good thing. Check out Aggie Horticulture Facebook Live. It is really, really well worth it. I think you will find that you can learn a whole lot. Well, let's go to the phones again, and our number 845-5689, and we're going to talk to Maggie. Hey, Maggie.
Hello, Skip.
Hey.
I was just calling to ask about all the. I had some those whatchamacallit?
Okay,
the roses and knockout roses and all the frost bit stuff. Is it okay to start trimming some of that stuff off?
Yeah, a lot of times we do rose pruning in February.
Right.
Roses are a plant that the pruning will be a stimulating process. Now, if the temperature is still cold, it's not going to force growth. But if we have some warm temperatures, when you prune, it tends to push new growth out. And so we usually wait a little longer on the roses. I wouldn't say that you shouldn't prune roses, let's say mid-January, but I usually wait a little bit later into early February. What we find a lot of years, though, Maggie, is the roses get kind of rambunctious and they start growing whether we prune or not. And so that's a reason to prune them a little bit earlier. So I'm not saying don't do it now. In fact, a lot of people do it now for that reason.
Okay, and what about also the Confederate jasmine, all the browning leaves and stuff?
Yeah, Confederate jasmine, you could also cut it back now. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about some perennials and things. I need to mention that today while we're on the radio. But you can do some pruning back on it. It is a wonderful plant in terms of vine when it comes to just smelling delightfully, right? So I would probably on it hold off a little bit, but I don't think there's a problem going ahead and pruning it back a little bit.
Okay, and when you say pruning it back a little bit, it looks like all of mine turned brown almost all the way to the ground.
Yeah,
through the trellis.
It is not going to be an evergreen vine all winter above ground in the climate that we often have. So you can take it back as far as you need to, and if that's all the way to the ground, that's fine. But just look at how it's doing, and as you go back, take your thumbnail, scratch the vines, and see. Sometimes in protected locations, it seems to hold up a little bit better through the winter. But if you want to treat it like a perennial, that's also fine.
Okay, that sounds great. Just didn't want to cut off any, new buds or anything like that.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Well, enjoy.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's a wonderful day to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Let's go back to the phones now, and we're going to talk to John. Hello, John.
Good afternoon. I have a question about you were talking about potting soil.
Yes.
Or your starts.
Yes.
Your under the light. You go to the big box store, even Producers Co-op. They've got 3 or 4 different things that say potting soil.
Yes.
Is there something that you look for in the contents of the potting soil?
Well, yes. You want something that typically those are going to be peat based on peat moss with either perlite and or vermiculite added to them to help keep the peat from being mucky, soggy, wet, to kind of open it up a little bit. But now some are being based on coconut coir. It's the fuzzy stuff on a coconut that's been ground up into just a very fine material, and that's also fine. When it comes to which one, I don't want to get into brand names and stuff, but sometimes you get what you pay for to some degree, and that's certainly true of potting soil. I would go with one that maybe say a brand that's been around a little bit longer that you're more familiar with. When you open a bag of good potting soil, it looks just like what you would expect, like what I described. Sometimes we open some things and they're a little bit chunky. Maybe they had some compost in them, and they may not say potting soil, but they may have growing media or some other name on them. It's a wild west when it comes to naming things that are based on organic matter, whether it's compost or whatever. So I guess visually, and if you go with a good brand name, you're probably going to be just fine. Now, what are you wanting to start?
Everything.
Everything. Okay. So what I do, what I do is I like seed starting mix. Think of potting soil that's been ground even much finer. Seed starting mix is nice when you have little seeds, like a little broccoli seed or something small like that, because it doesn't fall down between the larger particles, so you have control over how deep you plant it, and it's easy to get good soil to seed contact, so it absorbs the moisture and grows well. But rather than just filling all my trays with seed starting mix, I'll usually put potting soil in about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way, and then finish the top with seed starting mix.
And that's what it's called, a seed starting mix?
Yeah, it'll say, mix for seed starting or something like that. But when you open it, it's a very fine textured. Now, if you're growing a squash plant, oh my gosh, potting soil is just fine. You don't need fine textured because they're big old giant seeds, right? But when you're looking at something smaller, it's just a way to do a little bit more of a precision job. And I know people that, and I have in the past, just used potting soil for everything. But that is one benefit of the seed starting mix that I mentioned.
You were talking with Maggie about vines, but I didn't hear what kind of vine. Is it this is the right time to prune grapevines?
Yes. She was talking about a Confederate jasmine, I believe is what we were discussing.
Okay, but we've like 3 different kinds of grapes, and I didn't.
Yes.
But difference, they're all ready to be pruned.
Yeah, it's good to do that in the middle of winter to get that pruning done. Typically a little bit later than midwinter maybe, but one thing that happens is as a grape starts to push new buds and growth, there's a lot of sap flow. And I've cut vines off on grapes and they just dripped and dripped and dripped. And you can say the vine bled, but it's just dripping and dripping. That's not going to kill the plant, but I like to get the pruning done a little bit earlier than that. But now would be a fine time to go ahead and do your grape.
A large, it's a native grape on a grape arbor that we'll worry about the grapes, but right, I haven't talked to you about this particular grapevine before because the coming out of the ground, it's probably 3.5 or 4 inches in diameter, and and I've really gotten really rowdy with it a couple of times and cut off a lot. And you're right. I mean, there were gallons of juice that came out of that. I thought I'd killed it for sure.
No, you didn't. But I don't know. I just don't think that's a good thing. Maybe we'll have a grape specialist call in or email me and say, don't worry about it. I don't worry about it, but I try to avoid that.
It is a very old grapevine that's been here, 25 years or so. And we try to keep it under control, but it keeps wanting to go up into the trees and everything else. So we sometimes have to get pretty aggressive, but it keeps coming back. I mean, it just of course we water it too in the hot part of summer, and we try to take care of it. But if something's kind of growing wild and native in a place, you kind of figure out it knows how to grow there, right? And it does pretty good. So that's true. Do you know that Texas has more species of native grapes than any place else? Wouldn't have thought that, right? But it sure does. We have a lot of different kinds of native grapes, and Texas native plants or native grapes have had a big place in the wine industry as well, because they are resistant to a particular disease that almost destroyed the French wine industry. Right.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your help always, and thanks a lot.
Well, good, and have fun starting those plants.
It's time.
It is time. Okay. Well, thank you for that call, John. Our phone number, 979-845-5689, 845-5689, or by email at gardensuccess@tamu.edu, gardensuccess@tamu.edu. Let's see, Suzanne emails, she'd planted some 1015 onions, onion sets in mid-December, and 2 weeks later had the 15-degree temperatures. Didn't cover them. Should she have? Well, currently have 1 to 2 small green tops, only sporadic. You know, I generally, when it's going to get really cold like that, I generally will cover things, just even things that probably are hardy enough, because 15 that's too cold. That's too cold, and I had damage to even some covered broccoli plants that I had a little bit of damage on those this year. So I think probably it would have been a good idea. Should you start over? You know, I can't see your plants, and I don't know how far back and how much damage there would have been. Assuming that they've already started making roots, if they still have a shoot down inside to come back out fresh and green, which I bet they do, I would probably leave them, because if you start over, you're starting over with a little dry transplant, no roots that are alive, and then it's got to make roots. So that's my best recommendation, but there's, that's a qualified suggestion, I guess, is the way to put it. But boy, it's fun to grow your own onions. I grew a bunch last year, and we're still eating some, in fact, from last year that we grew, and it's just fun to grow your own. Let's see, we're going to go to the phones now. Again, the number 845-5689, and we're going to talk to Kim. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Skip. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
I had a question regarding the potting soil you had just mentioned.
Yes.
How long does that soil in bags stay good? Because I bought some for the fall garden that I did not end up using and wasn't sure if it would be good till next season.
Yeah, it is. It's good.
Okay.
It's just think of decomposed material. How long is compost good? It just kind of continues to break down. Now, if it's peat-based, it's not going to break down very fast, but I use it. I'll even reuse occasionally potting soil from pots, and that's a big no-no. But you can put it in one of those turkey baking bags, the plastic bags you can put a turkey in, and make a hole or two, and you got to be careful, but you moisten the soil, heat it up to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. If you go too hot, you will stink yourself out of the kitchen, and it will essentially pasteurize that potting, pasteurize that potting soil. So if you had any concerns about old soil, you could still go. So I guess I'm taking it all the way back to, goodness, something that's been sitting in your container all year is just still good.
Would it be bad to put that used soil in your compost pile?
Oh, no,
not
at all.
Something?
No, put it in your compost pile.
Okay.
Unless it's a really unique thing, like you had nematodes in it, or it had a specific bad root rot that killed the plants. I use my old potting soil when I'm potting up larger plants. So maybe I'm moving tomatoes from a little cell tray up to a 4-inch pot or a gallon pot or something, or I'm bumping another plant up to a larger size. I use that. And when I'm filling a big container, I'll throw that stuff in the bottom and then put fresh stuff over the top, just because it saves you a little bit on potting soil.
Yeah, I do that too, so that's good.
Yeah.
I also had a question regarding the fall garden. I used a lot of leaves to try to add some mulch to the top, and I also covered it.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed in the last week that some of the plants that I thought were okay are starting to look brown on the leaves, the cauliflower, the broccoli. Mm-hmm. How do I know if those are going to come back or if they're too far gone?
I've been looking at that condition, and it happened on some of my plants that I covered. It's like the cover got them through the bitter cold, but then it was a clear cover in this case. And so then the sun came out and I went to pull the cover off. And I think if the plants got really cold and then they heat up really fast the next day, maybe it's a cold hardy plant like broccoli and it sort of freezes, but it normally could kind of take that degree of cold. But then when it gets really warm, I started noticing later browning of the plants as well. So I think that's kind of normal. Again, you just kind of look at the plants. If you got a halfway decent plant with some good healthy leaves on it, I'd leave it and let it grow, because when you start over with a new one, you're going backwards pretty significantly. And it may be that good base and root system is enough to push good, fast new growth and keep you ahead of the game.
Are those leaves okay to leave on, or are they going to cause it to be smothered? Because I noticed, unfortunately, that by putting the leaves on there, I sure did attract a lot of pill bugs.
Oh, yeah. Well, pill bugs love, but in general, there are a few exceptions, but in general, pill bugs are not a problem in your garden plants. Growing strawberries or something like that, they will be.
Okay.
But, so leave the leaves. Just if you can grind them up with a mower, kind of breaks them down, makes a denser mulch that really blocks the light without being as thick as it, and the leaves don't blow around your garden that way. But I do that all the time. Constant mulch. Now in the spring, if I were going to plant tomatoes, let's say early, I would pull my mulch back a few days ahead and let that soil start to warm in the sunshine, because if you keep it completely mulched, your tomatoes will be very slow to get going in that colder soil. But that's about the only time I don't have mulch on a bed.
Okay. Is it okay to go ahead and cut off the dead on all the things like the herbs and things that just didn't make it through the cold? I mean, some actually look okay, but others are completely dead.
Yeah,
okay.
It's fine. And, I cut a lot of plants back. That it's just with some things, if you take every green leaf off, it's a little too much of a shock for it. But on a lot of stuff, you asked taking off the dead, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, Suzanne. Thank you very much for the call. I'm sorry, Kim. I'm looking at an email here. Well, we were talking about that with Kim, and let me just make a few statements about perennials. Perennials are the term perennial applies to your area of the country, meaning if you go down to I-10, things like yellow bells, Esperanza, are a perennial. If you go up to Dalhart, it's not. It's an annual because it'll freeze to death. So perennial is a relative term, if you will. And we have plants that are perennials. Aggie Horticulture has a section where they talk about, in the Texas Superstars, they call them perannual plants, meaning they're kind of in between. It depends on how cold it gets where you live. And so yellow star or yellow bells, Esperanza, is one of those plants that freezes to the ground or sometimes not all the way to the ground, and some of the top growth stays. Another one is Duranta that does that. Let's see, there's some other examples that just aren't coming to mind at this moment. But on those kind of plants, the plant you're left with in the spring, if it didn't freeze to the ground, is kind of lopsided, lanky, doesn't look right. Cut them to the ground, they'll come right back out of the ground, and you'll have fresh, new, vigorous growth that looks just fine, a well-shaped plant, and so on. So go ahead and cut those back. If you have one of my favorite summer flower plants is Redbird of Paradise. Caesalpinia is the genus of it, and it will die to the ground all the time, sometimes completely die, but I cut all those back now. If you have ornamental grasses, the top is all dead. It's tawny colored, and you can just leave it and fresh new growth will come in, but you've got the brown and the tawny and the green, and it just doesn't look as good. So cut it back. Just think of taking it all the way back to, of course it depends on what you're talking about. Ornamental grasses is everything from pampas grass down to Gulf muley that you see around here, little bitty plants. But take it back to a few inches above the ground. If it's a big, thick miscanthus or maiden grass, maybe, cut it off about 10 inches high or 8 inches high, something like that. And then when the fresh growth comes, you'll have all new, fresh, green growth, and that I just think is a good thing to do. One thing I didn't mention in talking about things to do now is planting fruit. Fruit and nut trees are available or becoming available. I haven't checked at a garden center in the last couple of weeks, but those are really especially if they're bare root, are best planted in the middle of winter. And so the sooner you get them out, the faster they establish. Even if they're container grown, when you pull them out of the container, cut any roots that are growing in a circle, get them in the ground, same height. This is true of trees and shrubs. Same height that they were growing in the container, where the normal soil line is. With trees, I say dig down in that pot if there's not a root near the surface, and find the topmost root on the root ball and plant that root right at or barely below the surface. And that plant will do much better as a result. If you're planting fruit, give us a call at the Extension office or go to Aggie Horticulture website in the fruit section, and it will give you a list of recommended varieties, or I can do that from the Extension office for your area. And it will tell you if you need another variety for pollinating. Peaches, you can have one peach tree and it pollinates itself. It does just fine. But a lot of pears and apples, for example, need another pollinator to really set fruit well. And things like blueberries, which we really don't grow much here, they do better when they have a pollinator, but they'll produce some without it. But anyway, those are some tips. Well, goodness, we've been talking about all kinds of things spring. We're going to talk about some more things next week and hopefully answer your questions as well along the way. I want to remind you that past shows are available online to listen to and by podcast. So check with your podcast supplier. You can go back and listen to past shows. And by the way, if you missed our end of December show, 50 common mistakes that gardeners make, I think you will find it interesting and perhaps helpful as well. So go back and check that out. And also, when you're out and about, tell your friends about garden success, and especially if they're interested in gardening, encourage them to be a listener as well. Well, thanks for listening today. I'm your host, Skip Richter, and we're going to be back again next Thursday with you live again.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.